Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back from the break. We hope the food was tasty. I see there's fruit as well, very healthy of us. I cannot tell you how excited I am to be able to introduce to you our next keynote speaker. I'm a complete fangirl, and you'll understand why in a second. Khanyi Dhlomo's story is anything but ordinary. At the age of just 20, she made history. Oh, and she was a student of journalism at the time at the University of Wits. She made history as the first black newscaster for the South African Broadcasting Corporation. It was a time in South Africa where I believe, and this is not in the official bio, we needed to redefine what it was to be black. And Khanyi was black, beautiful, and in our homes every day on the primetime news. Khanyi's love of print media then led her to be selected as the editor for True Love magazine. After 8 years at True Love, and after her MBA at the Harvard Business School, Khanyi returned to South Africa to found Indalo Media. Indalo Media is a joint venture with Media24, the publishing arm of Naspers, and also Africa's largest media company. She's also founder of Destiny Connect and the founding editor of Destiny magazine, which I also believe is helping us redefine what it means to be black and male in a modern African state. Khanyi was named the most influential woman in South Africa by the Media magazine in 2003 and made the 2011 Forbes list for young power women in Africa. Khanyi is one of the most admired and respected women in South Africa and Africa, and I can prove this because there are people on the Twitter account for this forum who told us that they were only coming because Khanyi would be here. It is a true privilege as a fangirl and young business leader to be able to invite Khanyi on stage to share with us her story, her insights, her passion for Africa as a young, black, successful female entrepreneur and business leader. Please welcome Khanyi Dhlomo.
Thank you so much, Peter, for that warm introduction. And thank you for the pressure, everyone who said they were coming, who publicized that on Twitter. My heart started beating a little faster when I heard that. I am so pleased to be here and so honored, really, to be talking to you today about the topic. Okay, there we go. I thought I wouldn't get this wrong, but I have done exactly what I thought I wouldn't do. About the topic creating shared value, the link between competitive advantage and CSR. Thank you to Oxford, the Saïd Business School for inviting me here. Thank you to Professor Peter Tufano for his commitment to Africa and his commitment to raising the quota of students from Africa. It's been 10 years since I completed my MBA at Harvard Business School, so this is quite a poignant moment for me. And on coming here, I was reflecting. I came through from London, having attended some conferences there earlier, and I was reflecting on how quickly someone would argue with me around which is the better school between Harvard and Oxford. And I'm a big believer in the power of attraction, and I'm a big believer in the fact that what we think about, we do indeed attract. And so I did indeed attract that discussion within an hour of arriving here with James Steer. I don't know if James is here. Oh, there you are, James. And so obviously I was very pro-Harvard, and he was very pro-Oxford, having been here. And I did do a little bit of research after our discussion, and I have to concede that certainly from an age point of view, Oxford does beat Harvard by about 400 years. But that's all I'm... but that's all I'm conceding. The rest we need to have quite a rigorous discussion about. So this topic is very close to my heart. My company's payoff line is, or motto is, positively impacting lives. I really do believe in the idea of doing good while doing business and impacting lives positively while we are doing business. I'd like to, though, first talk about the proverb, which is the overarching theme of the conference, which is, until the lion learns how to write, every story will glorify the hunter. And at last night's dinner, Robert Dowden made an interesting observation. around the fact that there isn't really anyone necessarily stopping Africa from writing its own story. There are many Africans sharing their stories, many who have created movies, who are publishing books, award-winning books that tell African stories. Chinua Achebe, for example, was the pioneer who told African stories magnificently, some of which we still read and reference. But I think that where I differ as far as this issue is concerned is around the ownership of the products and services that disseminate those stories, and the ownership and creation of products and services that disseminate those stories. I think Africans still need to make great strides in being the ones that own the CNNs of the world and own the news and information disseminators. And for me, that's really what inspires what I do, is being in that position where one owns the content and owns the platform and can, in a meaningful way, influence the agenda. The proverb that my talk is centered on is, when two elephants fight, it is the grass that gets trampled. Now, I only found out last night from Boitumelo, whom I thank as well for reaching out to the Ndalo Media team for me to be here, but I only found out from her last night that speakers could actually choose their proverbs. I was given this one, so which is fine, but I think that if we are truly walking the talk, we should give the Africans a chance to define their narrative, right? So, so you are listening to an African who hasn't defined her narrative as far as the proverbs are concerned. But I certainly identify with this one immensely. And my understanding is that we have the Kikuyu people of Kenya to thank for this insightful proverb, which essentially means that when the powerful people fight, it's the small people who suffer the most. Or when the big and large fight, it's the small who suffer. When government and politics fight in protection of their own personal interests, it's society who suffers. And when politicians and political parties fight purely to protect their own interests, it's the people who voted them into power and who follow them who suffer. And I think implicit in this idea is the fact that the powerful and influential really do need to look beyond their personal interests. Gone are the days when we could only pursue power for our own personal interests. And we see the negative impact of that across the world, in business, in politics, in the political upheavals across the world, both in Africa and in developed economies. So for meaningful and sustainable growth and prosperity, our use of power has to be about the interests of all, the greatest good for the greatest number. And that brings me to the shared value side of my topic today. Now, according to the Shared Value Initiative, which is an initiative that's created and supported by FSG Social Impact Consulting, those of you in consulting will know them, in conjunction with Michael Porter at Harvard Business School, plug for Harvard, and the Clinton Global Initiative, and many others. Shared value is really a management strategy in which companies find business opportunities in solving societal problems. And I'm sure the business school students will obviously have even better definitions of this and better understanding of this, but I thought it important to just lay the ground in terms of my understanding of shared value. So it differs from philanthropy and CSR in that it's not just about giving back, but it's really about creating business models that really do promote social good and really do promote tangible social impact, and therein lies the competitive advantage that companies are able to extract from this. Now, I just want to go to the next slide. I'll come back to the one that I've just skipped. According to the Shared Value Initiative, there are 3 pillars or 3 levels to shared value. The one is reconceiving products and markets, so creating products specifically for a market, and we see a lot of this in Africa. James Wangi, the head of Delberg, spoke very eloquently last night at the dinner around the energy and electricity solutions that are being launched and created in Africa, which essentially are reconceiving products and markets. The other is redefining productivity in the value chain, so looking for efficiencies in the value chain that drive profitability, but also help and uplift the various entities and people along the value chain. And then the third one is enabling local cluster development, and there are wonderful examples around this. Being a student of Harvard and spent 2 years there going through more than 750 cases as part of the MBA program, I'm a sucker for cases, so I will indulge myself and you towards the end of my talk. But Nestle in India has done a wonderful job here in this regard, and I'll touch on that a little later in the talk. My view and my experience, my contribution to this thinking, with which I wholeheartedly agree, is that there are 3 other areas that we should be looking at when defining or thinking about shared value. And I'll go back now to the slide that I skipped. And those are audience, business operations, and leadership. In terms of audience, I'd like us to really think for a moment about the millennial consumer. According to Goldman Sachs's Millennials Coming of Age report, this is the largest generation in history that is about to enter the prime years of their spending. And they are set to change economies across the world. Many of you are millennials in the room in terms of when you were born. It's essentially people born between the ages of 1980, or between the years of 1980 and 2000. But what's interesting, and what many companies are discovering, and what we're certainly discovering, is that millennialism, because of the enormous influence of this group, they are very vocal. They are active on social media, they determine the social agenda, they determine what trends, and news companies are then writing according to what trends on social media. In our media company, we spend a good amount of time every morning tracking exactly what's trending on social media to really use it as a barometer of what's important in people's lives and what they want to read about. So this generation is determining what we talk about, and as a result is influencing people outside this age group. And so millennialism as a mindset is now coming through. This generation values authenticity more than any other thing, more than any other quality rather. Dan Schwabel's research shows that 43% of them value authenticity. But I think what's even more important, and what makes this topic so relevant, and I think kudos to Oxford for thinking about focusing on this, is that 75% of them say they would support a company above its competitors if doing good is not CSR, but it's actually part of their everyday processes of doing business. So it's ingrained in the company and it's part of the company's DNA. So if anyone has any doubt about the business rationale for doing good while doing business, and the business rationale for shared value, it's just the size and power and influence of this market, who will be our consumers, that really needs to get all of us thinking around how we change our current organizations and how we create, as innovators and entrepreneurs, products and services that resonate with them. And in Davos this year, LinkedIn shared some research which went a little further in terms of the kinds of companies that this age group wants to work for. And again, the key deciding factor for them around which company they want to work for is the company that is genuinely doing good for its community. So not just in terms of who they purchase from, but also who they work for. They are certainly making decisions around how much shared value is there, and how much is a company actually incorporating that into the way it does business. They're also highly globalized. They are aware of what's happening across the world. Many of them, again in the LinkedIn research, said that, in fact about 74%, so almost 3 in 4, said that they would welcome refugees into their countries, so something for Trump to chew on, and that they would actually also, 20% of them, so just under a quarter, said that they would actually host refugees in their own homes. So these are people who are extremely open-minded, very global, and very much around being global citizens, as opposed to the idea of my country first, or the interests of my country first, which we see in a lot of the political rhetoric across the world. A couple of other lists. I'll obviously share this presentation for anyone who's interested, but a couple of other items. They're politically progressive, as I've mentioned. They are creators, they are makers, they are collaborators. They're highly ambitious. They crave mentorship and training for career development. We're actually developing a product around that particular quality technology, which is, I think, something that we all know is an integral part of their lives, and they are more likely to be spiritually aware than affiliated with traditional religion. And this brings me to the second pillar, and it really picks up on that spiritual awareness, which is quite important to this group. And that is the idea of shifting from sales to service, shifting from the principle of sales and transaction to one of service and generally doing good and thinking about how one can benefit the consumer. And that's really the business operations pillar. Now, I believe that the intention and the energy behind our decisions is extremely important. We have to genuinely want to make the consumer's life better. We have to genuinely want the consumer to feel that their life has been enhanced by our actions if we want sustainable and long-lasting profitability and leadership in our various sectors. The idea that we succeed through a winner-takes-all approach is fast being proven to be non-sustainable, whether it's in business, whether it's in politics, and in fact, whether it's in life. It hasn't worked. It's not sustainable. And Marianne Williamson, who's one of my favorite spiritual authors and the author of A Return to Love and The Law of Divine Compensation, who speaks quite eloquently about the power of love in business, the power of compassion, the power of genuinely trying to figure out how do I help this person. And she shows how that impacts profitability in a significant way in her writings. And she says, think of your work life, therefore, not as separate from your spiritual life, but as central to your spiritual life. Whatever your business, it is your ministry. Whatever your business, it is your instrument to do good and change the world for the better. The two are not separate. And this is very different from a religious point of view, much more spiritual point of view, but very much the way that the millennial generation is thinking and doing things. Khalil Gibran echoes this view when he says, work is love made visible. And since we're in Britain, we'll quote a Brit, John Lennon, who says, there are two basic motivating forces, fear and love. When we are afraid, we pull back from life. And when we are in love, we open to all that life has to offer, with passion, with excitement, and acceptance. All emotions that I think should be the energy and the mindset that drives our strategies, our products, and our services. And that's really where the motto for us, positively impacting lives, comes from. We certainly haven't mastered it, but it's something we strive towards every day along the various areas of business that Ndalo Media operates on, from print to digital, content marketing, events and experiences, a platform that's highly important for the millennial market, book publishing, and then later this year, pictures and video. So in addition to trying as far as possible to incorporate that into our DNA and into how we do business, we do have other CSR or traditional CSR initiatives that are not necessarily around our business operations, but they do service markets that are important to us. So She by Spark International supports young female entrepreneurs, and we support their initiatives. UNICEF, we're an official partner for UNICEF in South Africa. Door of Hope and Children of the Dawn looks at the youth and children. The American designer, Carolina Herrera, has partnered with our organization around breast cancer, breast health, focusing on the female market, which is an important market for us. And then the student market is also very important to Ndalo Media. And to that end, we've launched the Student Helpline for Youth and Students, which we launched around the Fees Must Fall protests. We picked up on social media that there were many students who were traumatized, didn't want to use the university counseling services or couldn't have access to them. They were overextended and obviously couldn't afford counseling provided privately. And so we launched the Destiny Helpline in conjunction with the South African Drug and Abuse Organization. And basically, we sponsor a 24-hour telephone line where students can speak to qualified counselors around trauma linked to Fees Must Fall protests, or even careers, or racism, or relationship issues. So again, it's a separate CSR initiative, but it is helping an audience that we value and that we hope to welcome into our various platforms. My view is that in deciding to run a business driven by love and compassion as opposed to fear and competition, ultimately one has to embrace the human-to-human approach to business, which lauds collaboration over competition. I think a mindset underlying shared value and what we're talking about today is one of abundance. Often we go into business with a scarcity mentality. I think that focusing on competition, believing that markets are shrinking is not always helpful. Often when we decide that there is an opportunity and we decide to think in terms of abundance and we decide to think in terms of collaboration, of love and compassion, the results that we attract and the results that we see are positive. And I know that sounds quite metaphysical or philosophical for some, but I've certainly seen that proven in the way that we do business, and I've certainly seen many successful people prove that. It's very much about mindset, and it's very much about believing in abundance rather than scarcity. It takes us away from sometimes harmful competitive practices that we see in business quite often. And a company that's done this quite well, which is the first of about 3 case studies I'll share with you, and they've redefined productivity in their value chain, and that's Heineken, who sell more than $1 billion of beer to Africa every year. And they source about 49% of their raw materials locally, and they plan to boost that to about 60% by 2020. And they found that many farmers that they worked with were subjected to exchange rate fluctuations. So their intervention was to protect them against that, and also to increase the extent to which they buy from local farmers in Ethiopia, in Rwanda, and in South Africa. And that's kept them in a leadership and a very strong position in the African market. Now, I think that all these external interventions, looking at strategy, looking at products and services are very, very important. But I think that as leaders, if we do not look at ourselves internally, this is all irrelevant. I believe leadership, success, positive impact come from mastering ourselves. The real job is within. Success is an inside job. And I think for us as Africans, for us all as global citizens, we really owe it to ourselves to master ourselves, to get to know who we are, to get to know what our vision and our passion is. Themba Baloyi spoke very eloquently about this again at the dinner last night, that we really have to define and know exactly what we're aiming for and what we want to achieve. One of my most memorable courses, in fact, probably the only one I remember in detail, in more detail than the others from Harvard Business School, was a course called Building a Business in the Context of a Life. And it was an elective done in the second year after you'd done your first year, which is fairly standard, as you know. And I think it was in either the last few months of the course. And what this forced you to do was to take all these learnings from your business school training and actually draw up a spreadsheet, some kind of DCF on how wealthy you wanted to be. How much money do you really want to make? And how much is enough for you? And think about what are the things that drive you and how are you going to acquire that wealth and what are the decisions you're going to make. And I tell you, it was one of the most valuable exercises for me because it's something we seldom think about. We just run towards the goal often, and we get so caught up in the day-to-day, and we don't always stop to think, what am I chasing? How much of it do I want? And what are the trade-offs that I'm prepared to make along the way? And that kind of self-knowledge is enormously powerful. Success is an inside job I think we have too many powerful and influential people who haven't done the inside work, who then make the wrong decisions that negatively impact us all. So I think the most important thing we can do, I think even more important even than study, is to spend time really getting to know ourselves and figuring out how do we want to play the game of life. And Lao Tzu says this brilliantly when he says, knowing others is intelligence, knowing yourself is true wisdom. Mastering others is strength, mastering yourself is true power. And isn't it interesting that Solomon, whom is my favorite of all the kings in the Bible, asked just for wisdom? Whether you believe in the facts of it or not, I think the lesson is more important about, what he asked for and how that manifested in his life. It's a powerful quality, and it's worth it for us to spend every moment of our lives pursuing that. We will benefit, communities will benefit, business will benefit, the world will benefit. Linked to that, linked to self-knowledge, is mastery of our thoughts. And Frank Outlaw says, watch your thoughts, they become words. Watch your words, they become actions. Watch your actions, they become habits. Watch your habits, they become character. Watch your character, it becomes your destiny. Again, you can go to the best business schools, you can have the best qualifications, but if your thinking is not aligned to your goals, you will not succeed. It's as simple as that. And I think that, again, as African leaders who want to make an impact on the continent, who want to make an impact on the world, if we do not begin controlling our thoughts and directing our thoughts, directing our actions to be aligned with our thoughts, we will not succeed. We will come back year after year and sit in conference rooms like this with the problems still the size that they were the first year that we gathered. Heaven and hell are in here, depending on which thoughts you choose. It's extremely important, I believe, for any leader to master their thoughts. And the third element, which John Maxwell quotes very eloquently, he says, I can predict the long-term outcome of your success if you show me your daily habits. Again, self-management, self-mastery. To what extent are our daily habits aligned to our goals? What do we do every day that takes us towards our goals? Do we go to sleep at night satisfied that we did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps that bring us towards our goals? Now, this is obviously looking at you as the individual, but think about a group of us, a community of us, a country of us, and then a continent of us who are doing all these things. Then the things that we are talking about really do become a reality. And then the strategies, which is the outcome of the internal work, which is this, then do become a reality. They do then manifest, and they do then indeed move the continent forward. So I believe until we get this internal work right, and as soft and fuzzy as it may seem to some, this is the real deal. If we don't get this right, everything else is completely irrelevant, and everything else is completely out of reach for us. Okay. I think that takes us to, there we go. So I mentioned Mentor Feed earlier, which speaks to the millennial market's desire to have mentorship and training. But for us, it's also, it's an online mentorship and training platform that we're planning to launch, which is very much linked to my strong belief in self-mastery, in self-development. We've been working on this for about 2 years, and we'll be launching it in May this year. And one of the things that it aims to address as well is the idea that according to the African Economic Outlook, there's about a 54% mismatch between the skills of job seekers and employers' requirements in about 36 African countries. So while people do get a tertiary education, their skills and their abilities, especially around things like critical thinking, problem solving, negotiation skills, those skills are not always aligned with what companies are looking for. So Mentor Feed, it's for profit, but it's aimed at closing that gap, driving self-empowerment, self-mastery, but also bringing greater alignment between what companies are looking for and the skills that individuals have. I'd like to share now the last 3 case studies for you on companies that are living the principle of shared value. I mentioned Nestle earlier, which entered India in about 1962, and at the time there were only about 180 local farmers from whom they could source their products, and local farmers who could supply them with milk. And over that time, they've built refrigerated dairies as collection points for milk in each town. They've sent out trucks to actually collect milk from various collection points. They've provided medicines and nutritional supplements to the various farmers. And in that time, that group of farmers has grown from about 180 to 75,000. And the death rate of calves has dropped by about 75% because of that kind of intervention. So this is, for me, just such a powerful example of seeing business opportunities around societal needs and solving them in a way that makes business sense, but also uplifts the community. And this is the future of business. The other company is operational in Ghana, and that's M Pedigree, which combats the proliferation of counterfeit drugs in Africa. About 122,000 African children under the age of 5 die from consuming counterfeit drugs and anti-malarials, and about 700,000 deaths, almost 1 million deaths across the world, take place as a result of fake malaria drugs, fake TB drugs. And what this company does is that they've developed a 12-digit code which can be attached to those drug packets, which users can then send a text message for that particular drug to be verified for authenticity. They've partnered with various pharmaceuticals and can now be found on about 500 million drug containers in more than 12 African countries in the developing world. So again, an example of reconceiving products and markets in keeping with those 3 pillars I mentioned earlier of the definition of shared value. And then Gap has launched a program called PACE, which is a life skills program that they launched around 9 years ago for their seamstresses. And that covers topics like problem solving, decision making, financial literacy. And what they found is that productivity has increased in the various factories that produce for them. There's higher work satisfaction, there's lower attrition. Again, an example of enabling local cluster development and working with your supply chain and your suppliers to enhance their lives, but also to enhance the value of your business. And, okay. Whoa. So in closing, I'd like to go back again to the point I made earlier, just around the internal work that we have to do. Because I think that us, as Africans, we have a lot of thinking to do. And Professor Lumumba from Kenya touches on some of the points that we do indeed have to think about as Africans. Because in addition to self-knowledge, in addition to defining our goals, we have to ensure that we apply the skills that we learn and that we apply our ideas as Africans to Africa. Many of the examples I quoted today are international companies. A few are products and services created by Africans, but there are not enough. And he just touches on some of the reasons why. And for me, that's a really important thing that we need to think about if we are to create truly authentic shared value that we own as Africans, because therein lies the sustainability, therein lies the progress, and therein lies the prosperity.
Nairobi has universities, as indeed Kampala, as indeed South Africa, Johannesburg. We have all these universities. We have engineers. But our roads are not being made by Tanzanian civil engineers. It is the Chinese who are present in this assembly who are making our roads. So we have engineers who cannot even make roads. We have doctors whom we have trained But when we are sick, particularly if we are of the political class, depending on who colonized you, if you are colonized by the United Kingdom, you rush to London. If you are colonized by the French, you rush to Paris. If you are colonized by the Portuguese, you rush to Lisbon. And if you are colonized by the Spaniards, you rush to Madrid, Spain. And recently, because the Asians are beginning to get their act together, we run to India. And very lately, because the Arabs are also beginning to get their act together, we run to Dubai. Notwithstanding that we have the Kenyatta hostels of this country, the Muhimbilis of Tanzania, the Chris Hani Baragwanaths of South Africa, and the Mama Yemos of Kinshasa in Zaire or the Democratic Republic of Congo, but we have no faith in our doctors. In the area of education, we also don't have faith. Our political class introduced something that they call free education, that is free indeed, free of knowledge. Because they are so suspicious.
Okay, I'm not sure what happened there. Okay, but I think you've got the message, right? And we are running out of time anyway. But I think that, in closing, every story will glorify the hunter, and the grass will get trampled, and Africans will not create sustainable prosperity until we address this African schizophrenia, and until we work on here and accept that this is very much an inside job. Thank you.